This cat wouldn't let anyone touch him. The vet's discovery left everyone speechless. The parking lot of Paws and Healing Veterinary Clinic had seen its share of strays over the years, but none quite like the one that appeared on a grey October morning when the maple leaves were just beginning to turn crimson and gold. Dr. Coralie Winters noticed him first, a streak of amber moving between the dumpster and the storage shed, quick as lightning and twice as wary. She paused with her coffee halfway to her lips, watching the way he moved. Not the casual slink of a feral cat comfortable in his territory, but something more deliberate, more calculated. Like every step was a tactical decision. The cat was a medium-sized tabby with rich orange stripes that would have been beautiful if they weren't dulled by dirt and neglect. His coat had the matted, unkempt look of an animal who'd been on his own for far too long, though something about his bearing suggested he hadn't always been this way. There was intelligence in those amber eyes that tracked Coralie's every movement from beneath a parked pickup truck, measuring distances, calculating escape routes. Millbrook, Oregon wasn't the kind of place where mysteries went unsolved for long. The town had maybe 3,000 residents if you counted the farms spread out along Route 20, and everybody knew everybody else's business. The veterinary clinic sat on the eastern edge of town, where residential streets gave way to open fields, and the Cascade foothills rose in the distance like protective shoulders. It was the kind of morning where you could smell wood smoke from someone's fireplace, mixing with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and damp soil. Coralie set her coffee on the hood of her car and crouched down, making herself smaller, less threatening. The cat's ears twitched, but he didn't bolt. That was something. Most ferals would have been long gone by now. "Hey there, handsome," she said softly, her southern accent never quite lost despite 2 decades in Oregon, making the words gentle as a lullaby. "You look like you could use a friend." The cat's response was immediate and unmistakable. His ears flattened against his skull, his pupils dilated until only thin rings of amber remained, and a low growl emanated from deep in his chest. Not the warning hiss of a scared cat, but something more visceral, more desperate. It was the sound of an animal who'd learned that survival meant keeping everyone at bay. Coralie straightened slowly, filing away the observation. She'd been a veterinarian for 23 years, and she knew the difference between fear and trauma. This cat wasn't just scared, he was protecting something. Inside the clinic, Thora Magnusson was already prepping for the day's appointments. At 46, with silver threading through her dark blonde hair that she always wore in 2 thick braids, Thora had the kind of steady competence that put nervous pet owners at ease. She looked up when Coralie entered, reading something in her boss's expression. "What's wrong?" Thora asked, setting down the vaccination records she'd been reviewing. "We've got a visitor in the parking lot. Orange tabby, male, I think. Won't let me within 10 feet. Coralie hung her jacket on the hook by the door, already formulating a plan. "Something's not right with him, Thora. The way he moves, he's favoring his right hind leg. And the look in his eyes." She trailed off, searching for the right words. "I've seen scared cats. I've seen angry cats. This one? He looks like he's waiting for the world to hurt him again." Thora moved to the window, peering out at the parking lot. She spotted the cat immediately. He'd emerged from under the truck and was watching the clinic door with an intensity that made her chest tighten. There was something achingly familiar in that watchful stillness, the way he held himself apart, the visible tension in every muscle, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. "I'll put some food out," Thora said quietly. "See if we can at least get him eating regularly." "Good idea." "And Thora," Coralie caught her technician's eye, "don't try to touch him, not yet. This one needs time." The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that had nothing to do with the cat. Thora had been working at Paws and Healing for 8 years, and Coralie knew her story. Knew about Michael, the husband she'd lost 2 years ago when a timber truck's brakes failed on a wet mountain road. Knew about the way Thora had built walls around herself afterward, showing up for work with perfect punctuality and professional competence, but keeping everyone at arm's length. The parallels weren't lost on either of them. Over the next 3 weeks, the cat became a fixture in the parking lot. Thora established a routine, setting out food near the dumpster every morning at 7 and again at 5 in the evening. She never approached directly, never tried to get closer than necessary. Just left the food and retreated, watching from inside as the cat would eventually slink out to eat, his eyes never leaving the building's windows. The other staff noticed him too. Beckett Hayes, fresh out of veterinary school with his degree still practically wet, lobbied repeatedly for a more proactive approach. "We should trap him," Beckett said one morning in late October, his enthusiasm undimmed by Coralie's repeated refusals. At 26, he still had the idealism that time and hard experience hadn't yet tempered. Humanely, of course. Get him checked out, treated, vaccinated. Find him a home. Coralie looked up from the beagle she was examining, meeting Beckett's earnest blue eyes. "And what do you think would happen to a cat that traumatized in a shelter environment?" "Well, Beckett faltered. "He'd shut down completely," Thora interjected, not looking up from the medication chart she was updating. "Stop eating, stop grooming. Probably develop stress-induced illness within a week." Beckett had the grace to look chastened. "So, we just leave him out there?" "We earn his trust," Coralie said firmly, "however long that takes." But the cat made it clear that trust was not on the table. He accepted the food, grudgingly it seemed, but any attempt to get closer sent him vanishing like smoke. The clinic's custodian, an elderly man named Silas who'd been maintaining the building for longer than most staff had been alive, tried approaching with his usual slow, quiet manner. The cat watched him from 20 feet away, body coiled like a spring, until Silas wisely retreated. "Never seen anything quite like it," Silas told Thora later, his weathered face thoughtful. He had the laconic way of speaking common to men who'd spent their lives in physical labor, words carefully measured and never wasted. "Most strays, they're either skittish or friendly once they realize you mean well. This one? He's decided we're all threats, and nothing's changing his mind." The clinic sat on 2 acres that included a large backyard where staff sometimes took their lunch breaks in good weather. There was a storage shed out back, tools and lawn equipment inside, with just enough gap under the door for a determined cat to squeeze through. Thora noticed the cat investigating it one evening as she was leaving, his ginger form a splash of warmth against the gathering dusk. November brought the first real cold snap, temperatures dropping into the 20s at night. Frost silvered the grass each morning, and the cat's coat began to look even more unkempt, his body language increasingly desperate as he wolfed down the food Thora provided. She started leaving out extra portions, her heart aching at the visible ribs beneath his matted fur. "He's not going to make it through winter out here," she told Coralie one afternoon. The clinic was quiet between appointments, and they were both watching the cat through the window. He was huddled near the dumpster, looking smaller than usual, his fur fluffed up against the cold. "I know," Coralie said softly, "but we can't force him. He has to choose to trust us." The universe, it seemed, had other plans. The storm hit Millbrook on the 3rd Tuesday of November with a fury that surprised even the locals. What the Weather Service had predicted as light snow flurries became a full-blown blizzard by early evening, wind howling down from the mountains and dumping 6 inches in as many hours. Thora stayed late, worried about the animals boarding overnight. 3 post-surgical cats, a diabetic dog, and a parrot recovering from a respiratory infection. By 8 o'clock, the roads were treacherous. Thora called her neighbor to check on her house, made sure all the clinic's animals were comfortable, and resigned herself to possibly spending the night on the office couch if conditions didn't improve. She was making another round of the boarding kennels when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a soft thump coming from the direction of the storage shed. Thora grabbed her heavy coat and a flashlight, stepping out into the maelstrom. The cold hit like a physical blow, wind driving snow into her face so hard it stung. She fought her way across the backyard, her flashlight beam swallowed by the swirling white. The shed door was shut, but she could see tracks in the fresh snow, small paw prints leading to the building and disappearing beneath the gap at the bottom of the door. Her hands were shaking as she opened it, and not just from the cold. The beam of her flashlight swept across lawn equipment, bags of salt, and neatly organized tools on pegboards. At first she thought she'd been wrong. Then she spotted him, a huddled shape behind a stack of paint cans in the far corner, barely visible in the shadows. The orange tabby was curled into the tightest ball possible, shivering so violently that Thora could see it from 15 feet away. His eyes were half closed, dulled by exhaustion and cold. For the first time since he'd appeared in their parking lot, he didn't run at the sight of a human. He simply didn't have the strength. "Oh, sweetheart," Thora breathed, her heart cracking open. "You're freezing." She knew better than to reach for him. Instead, she moved slowly, speaking in the soft, constant patter that she'd learned helped frightened animals. She retrieved a large carrier from the clinic, lined it with warm blankets and brought it back to the shed, along with a can of the premium tuna the clinic kept for medicating difficult cats. It took 20 minutes of patient coaxing, but desperation finally won out over fear. The cat, moving like every joint hurt, crept forward to the tuna. Thora had placed it just inside the carrier door, and when he ventured in to eat, she gently closed it behind him. The sound of the latch clicking sent the cat into immediate panic. He threw himself against the sides of the carrier with a force that terrified Thora, yowling in a way that sounded almost human. His distress was so profound, so visceral, that she found herself talking to him through the carrier door, her voice breaking. I know you're scared. I know you don't understand. But you're going to freeze to death out here, and I won't let that happen." Inside the clinic's warmth, Coralie took one look at the cat and made a decision. "We need to sedate him. He's going into shock from the stress." The cat's panic intensified at being handled even through thick protective gloves. His pupils were blown wide, his breathing rapid and shallow, foam flecking the corners of his mouth. Coralie worked quickly, administering a light sedative that would take the edge off his terror without knocking him out completely. As the medication took hold, the cat's frantic movements slowed, though his eyes remained fixed on them with that same desperate wariness. "Let's do a quick exam while we can," Coralie said, pulling on fresh gloves. "I want to know what we're dealing with." They worked together in practiced tandem, Thora gently restraining while Coralie examined. Underweight, no surprise there. Dehydrated. The limp they'd noticed was more pronounced up close. And his coat, which had looked merely unkempt from a distance, was severely matted in places. But it was when Coralie ran her hands along his sides, feeling for injuries or abnormalities, that she paused. Her fingers had encountered something strange, not the smooth glide over muscle and bone she expected, but something irregular, almost gritty. "Thora, do you feel this?" She guided her technician's hand to the spot, just behind the cat's left shoulder. Thora frowned, her experienced fingers probing gently. "It's like, I don't know, scar tissue maybe, but the texture is off." "That's what I thought." Coralie moved her examination along the cat's body, finding more spots with the same odd quality. "Here, and here. It's all over him." They exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing but neither wanting to voice it yet, not without being sure. "We'll address it tomorrow," Coralie finally said, though her mind was already racing through possibilities. "Right now, let's get him stable. Fluids, warming blankets, and let's set him up in the isolation room, somewhere quiet where he can decompress." The cat, they still didn't have a name for him, spent the night in a large kennel in the clinic's isolation room, a space usually reserved for post-surgical patients or animals requiring quiet. Thora checked on him 3 times before finally heading home near midnight, finding him huddled in the far corner of the kennel, watching her with those unreadable amber eyes. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving Millbrook blanketed in pristine white. The town came back to life slowly. Snowplows clearing main roads, neighbors helping each other dig out driveways, children already building snowmen before school. At the clinic, the day's appointments had largely been cancelled, giving the staff time to focus on their unexpected guest. The cat was awake and alert, though he hadn't touched the food Thora had left. He tracked her movements with laser focus as she went through her morning routine, feeding and caring for the other boarding animals. When she approached his kennel, he pressed himself against the back wall, making himself as small as possible. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly, though she knew the words meant nothing to him. It was the tone that mattered. Calm, steady, non-threatening. "I promise, we only want to help." But the cat's body language screamed that he didn't believe her. Every muscle was tensed for flight, though there was nowhere to go. His breathing came quick and shallow, visible in the rise and fall of his ribcage. Most striking were his eyes, not just fearful, but calculating, watching, waiting for his opportunity. Beckett arrived around 10, stomping snow from his boots in the entryway. "How's our rescue doing?" he asked, unzipping his parka. "Alive," Thora said. "Beyond that? Hard to say. He won't eat, won't relax, and looks at us like we're about to murder him. Classic feral behavior. That's just it. I don't think he is feral." Thora had been mulling this over all morning. A true feral wouldn't have survived on our doorstep this long. They'd have moved on to easier territory. And did you see his face? There's too much awareness there, too much Thought, I guess, like he's not just reacting on instinct. Beckett peered through the kennel door, meeting the cat's stare. So what? You think he's someone's pet that got lost? I think he's someone's pet that got hurt, Coralie said, entering the room with a medical chart. Badly hurt, and I think whatever happened to him, he's decided that humans did it. The words settled over them like a weight. In the isolation room, the cat watched them watching him, and the distance between them felt like a canyon. The morning wore on. The cat remained in his corner, refusing food and water, his eyes never closing, even though exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. Thora tried everything, different types of food, moving his bowls closer, then farther away, even leaving the room entirely to see if he'd eat without an audience. Nothing worked. "He's going to make himself sick," Beckett said, frustration creeping into his voice. "We can't just stand here and watch him starve himself." "We can, and we will," Coralie said firmly. "Forcing the issue will only traumatize him more. He'll eat when he feels safe enough. Until then, we wait. And if he doesn't," Beckett challenged, "then we reassess." "But Beckett," Coralie fixed him with a stern look, "this cat has survived things we can only imagine. Give him some credit for knowing what he needs." It was 3 in the afternoon when Thora, checking on him for the dozenth time, found that the water bowl had been disturbed. Not much, just enough to show that the cat had drunk. It was the smallest of victories, but she felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. He was fighting to survive. Despite everything, he was still choosing life. By evening, half the food was gone too. The cat had waited until the clinic was closed, until the only person remaining was Thora doing her final rounds, and he'd ventured to his bowls in the darkest corner of his kennel. Progress measured in ounces of kibble and sips of water. Thora sat on the floor outside his kennel, far enough away not to threaten, close enough to be present. She didn't try to talk to him, didn't make demands or reach out. Just sat there in the quiet, listening to the furnace kick on, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the medication room, the sound of her own breathing. After maybe 20 minutes, the cat shifted slightly. Not much, just a subtle relaxation of his haunches, a barely perceptible settling. But Thora noticed, and for the first time since this orange tabby had entered their lives, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could reach him. The cat remained motionless again, but his eyes held something new. Not trust, they were miles from trust, but perhaps the very beginning of recognition that these humans, for reasons he couldn't understand, weren't hurting him yet, and in the calculus of survival, yet was enough to work with. Thora's phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor, asking if she needed anything from the store. She responded quickly, then glanced back at the kennel. The cat was watching her, head slightly tilted as if trying to understand the human ritual of staring at small glowing rectangles. "You must think we're very strange," Thora murmured. "All our weird habits and things. But you know what? I think you're pretty strange too, little man. Most cats would have figured out by now that we're trying to help." The cat blinked slowly, once, twice. Not the deliberate slow blink that meant trust and affection, but simply the blink of a tired animal fighting to stay alert. His eyelids were heavy, his body desperate for real sleep, but he wouldn't allow himself to be that vulnerable. Not yet. Thora stood slowly, her knees protesting. 46 wasn't old, but spending hours on clinic floors didn't get easier with age. "All right, stubborn one. I'm heading home. You try to rest, okay? Tomorrow's another day." She paused at the door, looking back one more time. The cat had shifted positions, angling himself so he could see both the kennel door and the room's entrance simultaneously, always calculating, always ready. As Thora drove home through Millbrook's snow-packed streets, past houses decorated with early Christmas lights and smoke curling from chimneys, she found herself thinking about walls, about the barriers people and animals built to protect themselves from being hurt again. About how sometimes those walls became prisons. She thought about Michael, about the way she'd locked herself away after losing him, how she came to work, did her job perfectly, went home, and repeated the cycle without ever really living. The cat's desperate isolation felt uncomfortably familiar. "Maybe," she said to the empty car, her breath fogging in the cold, "maybe we both need to learn to trust again." Back at the clinic, in the quiet darkness of the isolation room, the orange tabby finally allowed his eyes to close, just for a moment, just long enough to acknowledge that perhaps, in this warm, safe place, he might lower his guard by the tiniest fraction. His last conscious thought, if a cat could be said to have conscious thoughts, was that tomorrow he would need to be vigilant again. But tonight, just for tonight, he could rest. The question was whether rest would be enough to heal what was broken, and whether any amount of patience could bridge the vast distance between trauma and trust. Before we continue with the story, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support truly helps keep this channel alive and growing. The cat still didn't have a name. 3 days after the snowstorm rescue, this fact bothered Thora more than it probably should have. She'd taken to mentally calling him Russet after his rich orange coloring, but saying it aloud felt presumptuous, like naming him would be claiming something he hadn't agreed to give. Dr. Coralie Winters had other concerns. The cat, Russet, if only in Thora's mind, was eating and drinking normally now, but his behavior remained deeply abnormal. Most animals in the clinic, even traumatized ones, showed some adaptation over time. They learned the routine, recognized their caregivers, began to relax incrementally. This cat seemed frozen in his fear, every day exactly like the last. Alert, tense, watching every movement like it might be an attack. It was the isolation that disturbed Coralie most, not just from humans, which was understandable, but from the very concept of comfort itself. They'd put a soft bed in his kennel. He refused to use it, sleeping instead on the hard plastic floor. They'd offered him toys, feathers, bowls, crinkly things that other cats found irresistible. He ignored them all. It was as if he'd decided that anything beyond basic survival was a luxury he couldn't afford. On the 4th day, something shifted. Thora was checking on the post-surgical patients when she noticed Russet had moved from his usual corner to a position near the front of his kennel. Not close enough to touch the door, but closer than he'd ever ventured before. His amber eyes tracked her movements as she worked, but for the first time, he didn't flatten his ears or crouch lower when she looked at him. "Hey there," she said softly, keeping her voice light and casual. "You're looking a bit braver today." Russet's ears twitched, processing the sound of her voice. His tail, which had been curled tight around his body since his arrival, loosened slightly. Just a fraction, but Thora noticed. She'd been watching this cat so intently that she'd memorized every nuance of his body language. She went about her tasks, deliberately not focusing on him, letting him observe without pressure. The key, she'd learned over the years, was to let animals make the choice to interact, to be present and calm, an invitation rather than a demand. When she glanced back 15 minutes later, Russet had moved even closer to the kennel door. He was sitting now, not crouched, his posture marginally less defensive. His eyes held something different too, still wary, but with a thread of curiosity woven through the fear. "That's it," Thora murmured, her heart rate picking up slightly. "You're figuring it out, aren't you? We're not going to hurt you." She made herself turn away, resisting the urge to push for more progress. Baby steps. Everything with this cat would be baby steps. Beckett came in an hour later, excited about a new patient, a Great Dane puppy with a tendency to eat things that weren't food. Mrs. Henderson found him trying to swallow a dish towel, he reported, barely containing his amusement. 3rd foreign object this month. "Some dogs are determined to eat themselves into an emergency surgery," Coralie said dryly. "How's our boarding crew today, Thora?" "Good. The post-op cats are all healing nicely. And," Thora hesitated, not wanting to oversell it, "I think our orange friend might be starting to trust me. Just a little." "Really?" Beckett immediately moved toward the isolation room. "Beckett, don't," Thora started, but he was already opening the door. The effect on Russet was immediate and dramatic. The small amount of relaxation he'd achieved vanished like smoke. He shot backward to his corner, ears flat, eyes wide, body compressed into the smallest possible shape. A low growl emanated from his chest, vibrating with pure distress. "Whoa," Beckett said, startled. "I didn't even get close to him." "He doesn't know you," Thora said, trying to keep the frustration from her voice. "You're a stranger, a threat. But I work here. He's seen me before. Seeing you and trusting you are completely different things." Thora moved past him into the room, positioning herself where Russet could see her clearly. For animals like him, every new person is a potential danger until proven otherwise, and proving otherwise takes time. Beckett backed out of the room looking chastened. "Sorry, I just wanted to see the progress." After he left, Thora spent 20 minutes just sitting outside the kennel, letting Russet's nervous system settle. She'd brought a magazine and pretended to read, though mostly she was monitoring him peripherally. Slowly, incrementally, his posture loosened. The growling stopped. His breathing returned to normal. "I know," she told him quietly. "The world is full of scary things, but not all of them are out to get you." That afternoon, during the slow period between appointments, Coralie came to sit with Thora outside Russet's kennel. They'd worked together long enough that comfortable silence was easy between them. "Tell me what you see," Coralie finally said. Thora considered the question carefully. "A cat who's been hurt. Systematically, I think. Not just one bad incident, but prolonged trauma. Look at the way he positions himself, always with clear sightlines to all possible entry points. The way he never fully relaxes, even when he's sleeping. That's not fear. That's hypervigilance. That's PTSD." "That's what I think too," Coralie agreed. "And whatever happened to him, it involved direct human contact. He's more comfortable with us when we're farther away. The closer we get, the more he panics. Can we help him with that? Maybe. Probably. But it's going to take time and we need to be strategic about it." Coralie pulled out her phone, opening a notes app. "I'm thinking systematic desensitization. We start where he's comfortable, which appears to be about 6 feet away, and we never push past that boundary until he chooses to close the distance himself. That could take months. Then it takes months." Coralie's voice was firm. "This cat deserves our patience, Thora. He's been through hell. We're not going to rush his healing just because it's convenient for us." They implemented the plan the next day. Thora became Russet's primary caregiver, the only person who fed him, cleaned his kennel, or spent extended time in the isolation room. Beckett and Coralie would visit, but always with Thora present, always staying back, letting Russet learn their presence without threat. The change was subtle, but real. By the end of the first week, Russet no longer growled when Thora entered the room. By the end of the second, he would eat while she was present, though he watched her constantly. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. December crept in with grey skies and the promise of more snow. Millbrook transformed into a picture-perfect winter town, storefronts decorated with garlands and lights, the smell of pine and cinnamon everywhere. The clinic participated in the local Winter Lights Festival, a tradition where businesses kept their windows lit with electric candles all month to honor loved ones who'd passed away. Thora found herself thinking about Michael more during this season. 2 years hadn't dulled the missing as much as she'd hoped. She'd learned to function around the grief, to build her life into a shape that accommodated the hollow space where he used to be, but she hadn't learned to fill it. Hadn't wanted to, really. Filling it felt like forgetting. She was arranging candles in the clinic's front window one evening when Beckett approached, his usual enthusiasm tempered by something more serious. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. Why this cat? I mean, I get that he needs help, but you're investing so much time in him. Hours every day, sitting there, just waiting for him to trust you." Beckett gestured vaguely toward the back of the clinic. "We've had plenty of difficult cases before and you've never—" He trailed off, but Thora understood what he wasn't saying. She'd never been particularly attached to previous patients. Professional, competent, caring, but not like this. Not spending her lunch breaks on the floor outside a kennel, talking to a cat who couldn't understand her words. "I don't know," she said finally, which was both true and not true. "Maybe because he reminds me that walls don't keep you safe, they just keep you alone." Beckett was smart enough to recognize a deeper conversation when he heard one, and kind enough not to push. He simply nodded and went back to organizing medication schedules. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, Thora made a decision. She brought her dinner, leftover casserole from a neighbor who still thought she needed taking care of, and sat outside Russet's kennel to eat it. Not talking to him, not trying to interact, just being present, sharing space. Russet watched her with intense focus, his head tilted slightly as she used her fork, as if the mechanical action of eating fascinated him. When she took a sip of water, his pink tongue darted out to lick his own lips. Mirroring, maybe, or maybe just coincidence. "You know what the loneliest part is?" Thora found herself saying, her voice soft in the quiet clinic. "It's not the empty house or the empty bed. It's the loss of someone who knew you, really knew you. All your weird habits and random thoughts and the way you take your coffee. Michael knew that I hate strawberry ice cream, but love strawberry jam, that I can't sleep with socks on, That I read the ends of books first because I can't stand the suspense. Russet's ears swiveled toward her voice, processing the rhythm and tone, even if the words meant nothing. And now he's gone, and all those little pieces of me that he carried, they're just gone too, like they never existed. She set down her fork, surprised to feel tears burning behind her eyes. So I keep them locked away where no one else can see them, because letting someone know you means giving them the power to take all those pieces with them when they leave. The silence after her words felt heavy. Thora wiped her eyes roughly, embarrassed by the outburst, even though no human had heard it. But when she looked up, Russet was still watching her, and in his amber eyes she saw something that might have been understanding, or maybe just recognition. One traumatized creature recognizing another. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" she said, managing a watery laugh. "Both of us too scared to let anyone get close." That night, Russet did something unprecedented. As Thora was gathering her things to leave, he moved to the front of his kennel. Not pressed against the bars, but close enough that the distance between them felt smaller than it ever had before. He sat there watching her, and for just a moment, his body language read less like threat assessment and more like goodbye. "Good night, Russet," Thora said softly, using his name aloud for the first time. His tail twitched. Once. A tiny acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand that names could mean connection rather than control. The week before Christmas, the clinic closed for a long weekend to give staff time with their families. Coralie had relatives visiting from South Carolina. Silas was heading to his daughter's place in Portland. Even Beckett had plans, a ski trip with college friends. Thora had nowhere particular to be. Her parents were gone, her sister lived in Australia, and most of her friends had drifted away after Michael's death, worn down by her grief or unsure how to interact with her anymore. She'd considered driving up to Seattle, maybe doing some shopping or seeing a museum, but the thought exhausted her. "I'll stay," she told Coralie. "Someone needs to check on the borders anyway." "Thora, you don't have to—" "I want to," Thora interrupted gently. "Really, I'd rather be here than home alone pretending I'm enjoying the holiday." So the clinic was hers for 3 days. Just her and the animals, and the peculiar peace that came from their uncomplicated needs. Feed them, clean up after them, give them attention and care. Simple, manageable. Beckett had also volunteered for one overnight shift, checking in late on the second evening. Thora had already been there since morning and was planning to head home soon, but she walked him through the evening routine first. "Everyone's doing great," she said, showing him the charts. "The diabetic schnauzer gets his insulin at 9. The surgical cats should all be fine until morning. And Russet—" I know. "Stay back, don't try to touch him, let him come to me." Beckett grinned. "I've been paying attention." "I know you have." Thora squeezed his shoulder. "You're doing really well, Beckett. I'm sorry if I've been hard on you. You've been teaching me. There's a difference." His expression turned more serious. "Can I ask, do you think he'll ever be adoptable? Russet, I mean. Will he ever trust people enough to live in a home?" "I don't know," Thora admitted. "But I think he deserves the chance to try, don't you?" After she left, Beckett settled in for the long shift. He'd brought textbooks to study, never too early to start prepping for his veterinary boards, and set himself up in the break room with coffee and determination. Every few hours he made rounds, checking on the animals, ensuring everyone had water and clean spaces. Around midnight, he ventured into the isolation room. Russet was awake as he often seemed to be at night, sitting in his usual watchful position. His eyes tracked Beckett's movements with laser focus. "Hey, buddy," Beckett said softly, maintaining his distance. "Everyone treating you okay? Getting enough food?" Russet's tail swished once, not aggressively, just acknowledgement. Beckett sat down on the floor, back against the wall, positioning himself where he could see the kennel, but wasn't looming over it. He opened his textbook, Feline Internal Medicine, dense and technical, and started reading aloud, not to Russet specifically, just reading to fill the silence. Chapter 15, Cardiovascular Disorders in Cats. The feline cardiovascular system presents unique diagnostic challenges due to, he continued, his voice taking on the rhythmic drone of someone reading complex medical text. Russet's ears swiveled forward, processing this new stimulus. Human speech without direct engagement. Sound without threat. After a while, his posture softened almost imperceptibly. Beckett read for nearly an hour before checking his watch and deciding he needed more coffee. He stood slowly, marking his place in the book. "All right, rust-colored friend. I'll be back in a bit." He was halfway to the door when he heard it, a small sound from Russet's kennel. Not a growl or hiss, but something softer, almost like a chirp. Beckett turned slowly, hope leaping in his chest, but Russet had already retreated to his corner. The moment of connection, if that's what it was, already gone. Still, Beckett grinned all the way to the break room. Progress. It was the tiniest imaginable progress, but progress nonetheless. He returned to the isolation room with fresh coffee and resumed his position on the floor. This time he read from a different book, one of the novels he'd brought for entertainment, a thriller about a detective solving murders in a small coastal town. The plot was convoluted and probably not great literature, but his voice filled the space between them, and gradually, over the course of hours, Russet's eyes began to droop. By 3 in the morning, the cat was sleeping. Not the fitful, watchful dozing Thora had described, but actual deep sleep, his body finally releasing its constant vigilance. Beckett watched him with something like awe. This small creature, who'd been through unimaginable trauma, learning to rest in the presence of a human, trusting for just a few hours that he was safe. It was in this moment of gentle optimism that Beckett made his mistake. He'd been doing so well, following all the protocols, maintaining all the boundaries. But watching Russet sleep so peacefully, seeing how far the cat had come, Beckett let his enthusiasm override his training. He thought about Thora's dedication, about how much she'd invested in this animal. He thought about Christmas coming, about how amazing it would be if Russet made a real breakthrough, if they could tell Thora that her patient had accepted direct human contact. Slowly, moving with exaggerated care, Beckett approached the kennel. Russet was still asleep, his breathing even and peaceful. Beckett opened the kennel door with a quiet click, holding his breath. The cat didn't stir. He reached in, his hand moving toward that orange fur with infinite patience. Just a small touch, he told himself, just to show Russet that gentle human contact wasn't something to fear. His fingers were inches away when Russet's eyes snapped open. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The sleepy, relaxed cat vanished, replaced by pure survival instinct. Russet exploded into motion, a blur of orange and rage, claws extended. He caught Beckett's hand with a strike that drew blood in 3 parallel lines, then launched himself at the kennel door with such force that Beckett stumbled backward. "Shit!" Beckett yanked his hand back, blood welling from the scratches. Russet was pressed against the back of the kennel now, every hair standing on end, making himself look twice his actual size. The growl emanating from him was primordial, a sound of pure terror, mixed with fury. "I'm sorry," Beckett said, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have—" But Russet was beyond hearing. He was lost in his panic, his carefully built trust shattered in a single moment of human presumption. Beckett backed away, cradling his injured hand, his heart pounding with adrenaline and guilt. He closed the isolation room door and stumbled to the bathroom to clean his wounds. The scratches weren't deep, but they stung like hell, and they bled freely. As he ran cold water over them, Beckett's medical training kicked in. Cat scratches could be serious. Infection, cat scratch fever, complications. He'd need to document this, probably start antibiotics prophylactically. But it was the emotional wound that hurt worse. He'd betrayed Russet's fragile trust. He'd proven every fear the cat had about humans, that they couldn't be relied upon to respect boundaries, that they would always eventually try to control or hurt you. Beckett finished bandaging his hand and forced himself to return to the isolation room. He needed to check that Russet was okay, that he hadn't injured himself in his panic. Through the small window in the door, he could see the cat still pressed against the back of the kennel, body rigid with tension. But then Beckett noticed something that made his stomach drop even further. On the floor of the kennel, near where the confrontation had happened, was a small object, something metal glinting in the overhead light. It must have fallen from Russet during the struggle. Beckett's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and used the zoom function to get a better look. The object was tiny, maybe half the size of his pinky nail, irregularly shaped and darkened with age and rust. It looked almost like a piece of wire or a fragment of metal, something that had no business being loose in a cat's kennel unless it had come from the cat himself. Beckett took several photos, his mind racing. He should call Thora. No, it was 3 in the morning, and there was nothing she could do right now anyway. He should call Dr. Winters. Same problem. But this discovery felt significant, potentially critically significant. He spent the rest of his shift monitoring Russet from outside the room, documenting everything that had happened, staring at the photos of that small metal fragment. By the time Thora arrived at 8 in the morning, Beckett was exhausted, guilt-ridden, and bursting with confused urgency. "I messed up," were the first words out of his mouth. Thora took in his bandaged hand, his haggard expression, and felt her stomach sink. What happened? He told her everything. The reading, the progress, the terrible decision to try touching Russet, the scratch, and finally the mysterious metal fragment. Through it all, Thora's expression grew progressively more concerned. "Show me," she said when he finished. They looked through the isolation room window together. Russet was awake but motionless, his eyes dull with exhaustion. He'd clearly been unable to relax after the incident. All the progress they'd made, weeks of patient work, potentially destroyed in a single moment. "I'm so sorry," Beckett said miserably. "I thought I was helping. I thought—" "You thought you knew better than he did what he needed," Thora said, her voice sharper than usual. "You decided your timeline for his healing was more important than his own." The words hit like a slap, but Beckett didn't argue. They were true. "However," Thora continued, her tone softening slightly, "you may have inadvertently discovered something important." She pulled out her own phone, examining the photos he'd sent her. "We need to show these to Coralie immediately. If this came from inside him, if he's been carrying fragments of metal around—" She didn't finish the sentence, but they both understood the implications. It would explain so much. The mysterious texture Coralie had noticed during the initial exam, the cat's extreme reaction to touch, the apparent hypervigilance. If Russet was in constant pain from embedded foreign objects, every human hand reaching toward him would be a threat of agony. Coralie arrived within an hour of Thora's call, her usually calm demeanor giving way to sharp focus when she saw the photos. She studied them for a long moment, her expression growing darker. "So we need to examine him properly," she finally said. "Full anesthesia, complete physical workup, x-rays if necessary. If there are metal fragments embedded in his tissue, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." "When?" Thora asked. "Today. Now. Before we lose any more time." Coralie looked through the window at Russet, and her eyes were sad. This poor animal. How long has he been living with this? They prepared the surgical suite in grim silence. Sedating Russet again was traumatic for everyone involved, but it was clear that his distress over Beckett's boundary violation made him even more resistant to handling than before. It took 3 of them working carefully to get him transferred from the kennel to the procedure table and even sedated. His muscles remained tense. Coralie worked methodically, starting with a complete visual examination. In the bright surgical lights, with time and ability to investigate thoroughly, the truth began to reveal itself like a nightmare, unfolding in slow motion. The strange texture they'd felt earlier wasn't scar tissue alone. It was scar tissue that had grown over and around foreign objects, multiple foreign objects, creating a surface that felt wrong because it was wrong. Coralie's experienced fingers mapped them out, behind his left shoulder, along his right flank near the base of his tail, across his back between the shoulder blades. Everywhere she touched, she found the telltale irregularity of tissue that had healed around something that shouldn't be there. "My God," Thora breathed, watching over Coralie's shoulder. "How many?" "I'm counting at least 7 distinct sites," Coralie said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Maybe more. We won't know until we get imaging." They transferred Russet to radiology, and the x-rays confirmed their worst fears. Scattered throughout his body, some superficial, some worryingly deep, were fragments of metal, wire mostly, thin pieces that showed up as bright white lines against the gray of his bones and organs. The images looked like someone had taken a cat and deliberately embedded a constellation of pain throughout his body. "Barbed wire," Coralie said, pointing to one particularly clear image. "See these barbs? This is from a barbed wire fence or trap, and this piece here," she indicated another fragment, "that's hardware cloth, galvanized steel mesh. A trap," Thora said, feeling sick. He was caught in a trap. Multiple traps, most likely, or one incredibly brutal one that he had to fight his way out of. Coralie's jaw was set in a hard line, and he's been carrying these pieces around for months, maybe years. Every single time someone tried to pet him, tried to pick him up, tried to show him affection. They were pressing these fragments into his nerves, his muscles. We weren't trying to hurt him, but from his perspective, from what his body was telling him, every touch was agony. The silence that followed was profound. They stood there looking at the images of Russet's suffering made visible and understood that they'd been asking this cat to trust them, while his nervous system screamed that trust meant pain. "Can we remove them?" Beckett asked quietly. He'd been standing back feeling like he'd lost the right to be involved, but the question needed asking. "We can try," Coralie said. "It'll be delicate work. Some of these have been in place long enough that tissue has grown significantly around them. Removing them risks damaging that tissue, but leaving them in place means he'll be in pain for the rest of his life. So we try," Thora said firmly. "We try because he deserves to live without hurting." They scheduled the surgery for 2 days later, giving them time to prepare and ensure they had everything needed. In the meantime, Russet was started on pain medication for the first time since his arrival. The effect was subtle but noticeable. Within hours, some of the rigid tension in his body eased. He moved more freely in his kennel, positioned himself more comfortably. The medication couldn't fix the underlying problem, but it took the edge off, and that small relief was visible in every line of his body. Thora spent those 2 days practically living at the clinic. She moved a cot into the isolation room, sleeping there so Russet would never wake to find himself alone. She talked to him constantly, her voice a steady stream of reassurance. "I'm so sorry," she told him on the evening before surgery. "I'm sorry we didn't figure it out sooner. Sorry you've been hurting this whole time, and we kept asking you to just get over it. You weren't broken, sweetheart. You were injured, and we're going to fix it." Russet watched her with those unreadable amber eyes, and if he understood any of it, he gave no sign. But he didn't retreat to his corner when she talked. He stayed near the front of the kennel listening, and that felt like something. The surgery was scheduled for early morning, when Coralie would be freshest and have the full day ahead if complications arose. Thora was there before dawn, checking on Russet one last time before the procedure. "You're going to be okay," she promised him, though she had no way to know if that was true. "You're strong, and you're a fighter, and we're going to give you a chance at a life without pain." When they wheeled Russet into surgery, Thora found she couldn't watch. She'd assisted in hundreds of procedures over her years as a vet tech, had held animals through everything from simple tooth cleanings to complex tumor removals. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She sat in the break room, staring at her coffee without drinking it, while Beckett paced and checked his watch every 3 minutes. Silas, who'd come in early to make sure everything was ready, eventually sat beside her. "That cat," he said in his slow, thoughtful way, "he's going to make it. Got too much determination to do otherwise." "How do you know?" Thora asked. "Because he survived whatever hell put all that metal in him in the first place. Most animals would have given up. He kept fighting." Silas patted her shoulder with one weathered hand. "And now he's got you fighting for him. That counts for something." In the surgical suite, Coralie worked with the intense focus that had made her one of the most respected veterinarians in rural Oregon. Each fragment required careful planning, where to make the incision, how to extract the metal without causing additional damage, how to close the wound to promote proper healing. Some pieces came out easily, the tissue having encapsulated them loosely. Others fought her, embedded so deeply that she had to use surgical tools to tease them free millimeter by millimeter. She catalogued each one, laying them out on a sterile tray. Twisted pieces of barbed wire, ranging from a few millimeters to nearly a centimeter long, fragments of galvanized mesh, still bearing the pattern of their original weave, a piece of what looked like a heavy-duty staple, each one a testament to sustained trauma, to an animal fighting desperately for freedom, from something that held him fast. 5 hours after the surgery began, Coralie finally emerged. Her scrubs were sweat-stained, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes held satisfaction. "I got them all," she said, "every piece I could find. 7 major fragments, plus several smaller pieces that had broken off. He's stable, vitals are good, and he's going to need several weeks of recovery, but—" She smiled, tired but genuine. "But he's going to be okay." Thora felt something inside her chest crack open, and suddenly she was crying. Not delicate tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and locked away. Beckett looked alarmed. Silas patted her back awkwardly, and Coralie wrapped her in a hug. "I know," Coralie murmured. "I know. It's okay. Let it out." Later, When Thora had composed herself enough to be embarrassed, she tried to explain. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I fell apart like that." "Because you've been holding yourself together for 2 years, Coralie said gently, "and sometimes seeing someone else get relief from their pain reminds us that we're still carrying ours." They let Russet recover overnight in the surgical suite, monitored constantly. When he began to wake, Thora was there, her voice the first thing he heard in his confused post-anesthesia haze. "You're okay," she told him. "You made it through. The bad parts are gone now." Russet's eyes struggled to focus, pupils still dilated from the drugs. But when he finally found her face, when recognition sparked in those amber depths, something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. Or just the acknowledgement that they'd both survived something that could have destroyed them. Over the next week, Russet's personality began to emerge from beneath the layers of trauma and pain. Without the constant physical suffering, without every nerve ending screaming danger at the prospect of touch, he could start to be something other than his fear. He watched Thora with increasing interest, rather than just wariness. When she cleaned his recovery kennel, he didn't plaster himself to the back wall. When she spoke to him, his ears swiveled forward attentively. And one morning, nearly 10 days after surgery, when she was sitting nearby updating his medical chart, he did something extraordinary. He chirped at her. The same soft, questioning sound Beckett had heard that night, but clearer now. Intentional. A request for acknowledgement. "Hi, Russet," Thora said, her heart racing. "Are you talking to me?" Another chirp. His tail did a small wave, not quite a friendly wag, but not aggressive either. "We're making progress, aren't we?" She stayed perfectly still, letting him control the interaction. "You're figuring out that it doesn't have to hurt anymore." It wasn't a breakthrough moment. There was no sudden rush of trust, no dramatic scene of reconciliation. But it was a beginning, and beginnings mattered. February brought more snow and the slow, steady work of rehabilitation. Russet's surgical wounds healed beautifully, the incision sites closing with clean pink scars that would eventually be hidden under his fur. But the psychological wounds would take longer. Coralie insisted on careful documentation of his progress, partly for medical records and partly for potential legal purposes. The metal fragments had been sent for analysis, and when the results came back, they confirmed what she'd suspected. The barbed wire was old, dating back decades based on its composition and level of corrosion. The location where it had come from was almost certainly rural property, somewhere with old fencing or abandoned structures. Beckett, still carrying guilt over his mistake, took it upon himself to investigate. He contacted the county sheriff's office, providing them with the physical evidence and Russet's story. To his surprise, they took it seriously. "We've had reports about abandoned properties in the area," the deputy told him. "Problem is, until something happens, until there's evidence of actual harm, our hands are tied. But this..." She held up the evidence bag containing the fragments Coralie had removed. "This is proof. Give me a few days to do some digging." The deputy, her name was Garrett, young and new to rural law enforcement, was good to her word. Within a week, she'd tracked the metal fragments' origins to a likely location, a defunct farm 15 miles north of Millbrook, property that had been foreclosed on 8 years ago and had sat empty ever since. Multiple neighbors had filed complaints over the years about suspected illegal trapping, but with no owner to hold responsible and no direct evidence, nothing had been done. When authorities finally inspected the property, what they found made regional news. Dozens of illegal traps scattered throughout the grounds, many still set, some containing the remains of animals who hadn't been as lucky or as determined as Russet. The case built itself quickly. Whoever had owned the property before foreclosure had been running an illegal trapping operation, probably for fur or pelts, and had simply abandoned everything when they lost the farm. For Thora, the news was both validating and devastating. Validating because it confirmed that Russet's trauma had been real, documented, undeniable. Devastating because it meant her instincts had been right. He'd been through absolute hell, and at least a dozen other animals had died in the same traps he'd somehow escaped. "How long do you think he was caught?" she asked Coralie one evening. They were in the isolation room, watching Russet groom himself, a good sign, indicating he felt comfortable enough to engage in normal cat behaviors. Based on how deeply some of those fragments were embedded, months, maybe longer. Coralie's voice was heavy. He could have been caught and escaped multiple times, or been caught once and fought free over a long period. Either way, the fact that he survived at all is remarkable. And the fact that he kept trying, Thora added softly. That after escaping all of that, after having every reason to give up, he kept fighting to survive. That's what gets me. His will to live is extraordinary. Russet paused in his grooming, one paw suspended mid-lick, and looked directly at Thora. For just a moment, in the late evening light filtering through the window, his expression seemed almost knowing, like he understood exactly what they were saying and was quietly proud of himself for proving everyone right about his strength. March arrived with the subtle shift from winter to early spring. The snow began melting in earnest, revealing the muddy earth beneath. Crocuses pushed through in defiant purple and yellow clusters, and in the isolation room at Paws and Healing, Russet took his next major step forward. Silas, in his quiet way, had been visiting the cat regularly. He never tried to interact directly, just came in to dust or reorganize supplies, humming or softly whistling folk tunes while he worked. Russet had grown accustomed to his presence, no longer tensing when the old man entered the room. On this particular morning, Silas was fixing a loose hinge on one of the storage cabinets, whistling something that might have been Shenandoah or might have been his own invention. He'd positioned himself near Russet's kennel, not right next to it, but closer than Thora or Beckett would have dared. Russet watched him work for a while, then did something unprecedented. He walked to the front of his kennel and sat down, facing Silas directly, not crouched, not preparing to flee, just sitting. And then, with obvious deliberation, he placed one paw through the bars. Silas noticed immediately but had the wisdom not to react dramatically. He just kept working, kept whistling, but shifted his position slightly so Russet could see him better. After a few moments, he spoke in his quiet, gravelly voice. "That's a brave thing you're doing there. Trusting is always brave." Russet's paw stayed extended for perhaps 10 seconds before he drew it back, but the gesture had been made. He had chosen of his own free will to reach toward a human rather than away. When Thora arrived and Silas told her what had happened, she had to fight back tears again. "He reached out to you?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Reckon he did," Silas confirmed. "Didn't seem like he wanted to be touched, mind you. More like he was just testing, seeing what would happen if he broke his own rule about staying back." "And what did happen?" Silas smiled, his weathered face crinkling. "Nothing. That's the point. He reached out and the world didn't end. Nobody hurt him. That's a lesson worth learning." The staff instituted a new policy based on Silas's experience. They would let Russet control all interactions. If he wanted to be near them, they made themselves available. If he wanted distance, they gave it without question. The key was letting him choose, always. Over the following weeks, Russet began choosing proximity more often. He'd position himself near the front of his kennel when Thora was working in the room. He'd watch Beckett, with what seemed like curiosity rather than pure fear. When Coralie came to check his healing wounds, he still tensed, but no longer growled. The change was gradual but unmistakable. Without constant pain distorting every interaction, Russet could begin to learn that humans weren't synonymous with suffering, that gentle voices could precede gentle actions, that the presence of people didn't automatically mean danger, but trust, real trust, required more than just the absence of pain. It required positive experiences to replace the negative ones, and that was going to take time they couldn't rush. Spring fully arrived in late March, and with it came Millbrook's annual celebration of renewal. The town's main street hosted a cherry blossom festival when the ornamental trees burst into clouds of pink. Local businesses set up booths. There were competitions for the best cherry pie, and the whole community came out to celebrate winter's end. At the clinic, the cherry trees in the backyard bloomed too, their flowers creating a canopy of soft pink that caught the light beautifully. Thora had started leaving the isolation room's window shade up during the day, letting Russet watch the world outside. He spent hours at that window, his attention fixed on birds building nests in the cherry trees, his tail twitching with predatory interest that felt wonderfully normal. It was during one of these bird-watching sessions that Maris Brennan arrived at the clinic for the first time. She was 16, thin in the way of teenagers who hadn't quite grown into their frames, with dark hair that fell in a curtain over one side of her face. She moved like someone who wanted to take up as little space as possible, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. "Community service," Coralie explained to Thora, reading from the paperwork Maris's social worker had sent over. 60 hours. She can help with general cleaning, organizing, basic animal care tasks under supervision. What did she do? Thora asked quietly. Coralie scanned the forms. Doesn't specify details, just says school-related incident. But her social worker notes severe anxiety disorder and recommends animal interaction as potentially therapeutic. Great, Thora thought with a mix of sympathy and exasperation. Another traumatized creature to help heal. But when she met Maris, saw the way the girl's hands shook slightly as she filled out her timesheet, something in Thora softened. Have you worked with animals before? Thora asked gently. Maris shook her head. I like them, though. They're easier than people. Truer words were never spoken, Thora agreed, surprising a small smile out of the girl. Come on, I'll show you around. Maris proved to be a diligent worker, if quiet. She swept and mopped without complaint, organized supplies with methodical precision, and showed surprising gentleness with the boarding animals. But it was when Thora brought her to the isolation room to meet Russet that something shifted. He's been through a lot, Thora explained, giving Maris the abbreviated version of Russet's story. So we're very careful about how we interact with him. No sudden movements, no trying to touch him. We let him set all the boundaries. Maris looked through the kennel door at Russet, who was in his now customary position by the window. Something in her expression changed, softened and sharpened simultaneously, recognition flickering across her face. He's scared, Maris said quietly. Not of being hurt again, of hoping and being wrong. The insight was so precise, so unexpected, that Thora found herself blinking back tears for what felt like the 100th time since Russet had entered their lives. Yes, she said, exactly that. Can I sit with him sometimes while I'm here? If you want to. So Maris began spending her breaks in the isolation room, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, far enough from Russet's kennel to be non-threatening. She didn't try to interact with him directly. Instead, she pulled out a worn paperback, fantasy novels mostly, stories about chosen ones and quests and magic, and read aloud. Her voice was soft but steady, and she read without performance or drama, just the words flowing naturally. Russet's ears would swivel toward her, tracking the rhythm of her speech. Sometimes his eyes would close, not in sleep, but in something like relaxation, lulled by the cadence of her reading. Chapter 4. The Dark Forest, Maris read one afternoon. Ariana knew that crossing into the Forbidden Wood meant leaving behind everything she'd known, but staying in the village meant living in fear forever, and she was tired of being afraid. Across the room in his kennel, Russet's tail twitched. If a cat could relate to a character in a young adult novel, he seemed to be doing exactly that. Over the weeks, Thora watched the unlikely parallel healing happening in her clinic. Maris would arrive for her shifts, still shy and withdrawn around the adult humans, but would come alive in Russet's presence. She'd talk to him about school, about the kids who didn't understand her, about the panic attacks that felt like drowning on dry land. And Russet would listen with the non-judgmental attention only animals can provide. I get it, Maris told him one day in late April. People think you're the problem because you react to things, but you're not crazy. You're just responding to what happened to you, and they act like you should just get over it, like trauma has an expiration date. She paused, absently turning the page of her book, though she wasn't reading anymore. My therapist says I have to learn to trust again, but it's like, why? Trusting people is what got me hurt in the first place. If I never trust anyone, I can't be disappointed. Russet, who had gradually been moving closer to the front of his kennel during these sessions, chirped softly. It wasn't agreement or disagreement, just acknowledgement. I hear you. But then I'd be alone forever, Maris continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. And being alone is safe, but it's also empty. And I don't know if safe and empty is better than risky and full. In the doorway, unnoticed by Maris, Thora stood listening. The girl's words echoed in her own chest, articulating something she'd been feeling but couldn't name. She'd chosen safe and empty too, after Michael, and it had been bearable but not really living. She cleared her throat softly, not wanting to startle Maris. The girl looked up, embarrassment flooding her face. Sorry, I was just... You were being honest, Thora said gently. Nothing to apologize for. She came into the room, settling onto the floor, a respectful distance from Maris. Can I tell you something? About Russet and trust? Maris nodded. Before he came here, his trust was betrayed in the worst way possible. Humans hurt him badly, and then left him to deal with the consequences alone. So when he showed up in our parking lot, he'd decided, rationally based on his experiences, that trusting humans was dangerous, and he was right. But you helped him, Maris pointed out. We helped him physically. We removed the things that were causing pain. But the healing trust part, that's still ongoing, and the thing is, we can't force it. We can't convince him with logic that we're safe, because logic didn't make him distrust us in the first place. Experience did. So now he needs new experiences, better ones, and those take time. How much time? However long it takes, Thora said simply. Maybe a few more months, maybe years, maybe always to some extent. But the alternative, giving up on trust entirely, means spending the rest of his life in a cage. And he deserves better than that. They sat in companionable silence for a while, 2 humans and 1 cat, all working through their own versions of the same fundamental question. Is opening yourself to hurt again worth the possibility of connection? The answer, when it started to emerge, came from an unexpected place. It was a drowsy afternoon in early May, unusually warm for Oregon, the kind of day that made everyone sleepy and content. Maris had finished her assigned tasks and was having her break in the isolation room, reading from her current fantasy novel. She'd reached an emotional scene, the protagonist reuniting with her lost family, and her voice had gone thick with vicarious feeling. Without really meaning to, her words slowed and then stopped. The warmth, the soft spring light, the emotional weight of the story, it all combined to pull her into sleep. Her head tipped back against the wall, the book slipping from her fingers, and within moments she was breathing deeply and evenly. Russet, who had been lounging in a patch of sunlight in his kennel, noticed immediately when her voice stopped. His ears swiveled, tracking the change in her breathing pattern. He stood, stretched in that full-body way cats do, and moved to the front of the kennel. For a long moment he simply watched her sleep. Then, with a decisiveness that seemed to surprise even him, he reached one paw through the bars of the kennel, extended it as far as it would go, and moving with careful deliberation, touched the girl's arm where it rested on the floor. The contact lasted only a second before he withdrew, but it was enough. It was a choice, made freely to bridge the distance between isolation and connection. When Maris woke 20 minutes later, she found Russet still at the front of the kennel, watching her with an expression that might have been satisfaction. She rubbed her eyes, momentarily disoriented, then saw the book lying where it had fallen from her hand. "Did I fall asleep?" she asked Russet, feeling slightly embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be boring." Russet blinked slowly at her, once, twice, 3 times. The deliberate, slow blink that in cat language meant trust, affection. "You're okay." Maris felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the constant tightness she'd carried there for months. She hadn't known about the touch, hadn't witnessed Russet's choice, but somehow the air between them felt different, less cautious, more possible. "Thanks for listening," she told him softly. "To all my weird problems, you're a good friend." Another slow blink. If she'd known how monumental that designation was, friend rather than threat, she might have cried. But in her innocence, she just smiled, picked up her book, and went back to reading. Thora heard about the incident from the clinic's security camera footage. They'd installed cameras in the isolation room, partly for monitoring Russet's recovery and partly for general security. When she reviewed the day's footage that evening and saw what Russet had done, she called Coralie immediately. "He initiated contact," Thora said, her voice shaking with excitement. "Completely voluntarily, reached out and touched her while she was sleeping." "That's huge," Coralie agreed. "But we need to be careful about reading too much into it. He touched someone who was unconscious, someone who couldn't react or reach back. That's very different from accepting touch from an alert human." "I know, but it's a step, a real step forward." "It absolutely is." Coralie paused. "Have you thought about what comes next? We can't keep him in that kennel forever. At some point, he needs to transition to a more normal life." "I know," Thora said again, but this time the words felt heavier, because normal life meant adoption, and adoption meant someone else would be Russet's person. The thought made her chest ache in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. Summer approached with the particular intensity of Pacific Northwest warmth, dry heat, clear skies and long evenings that seemed to stretch forever. Millbrook transformed into a postcard version of itself, with tourists passing through on their way to the mountains, farmers' markets crowding the downtown, and the whole town taking on a slower, easier pace. The clinic stayed busy but manageable. Russet continued his gradual progression toward trust, though setbacks still occurred. A door slamming in another part of the building could send him retreating to his corner for hours. A stranger's voice raised in excitement could undo a week of progress, but more and more often, the default was relaxation rather than fear. By mid-June, Russet was eating from a bowl while Thora sat just a few feet away. By early July, he would groom himself in her presence without constantly monitoring her movements. Small things, but they added up to a pattern. Healing was happening. It was Beckett who brought up the elephant in the room during a staff meeting one Monday morning. They were reviewing the week's schedule when he said, seemingly out of nowhere, "We need to start thinking about Russet's future." The silence that followed was pointed. Everyone knew what he meant, but no one wanted to say it. "He's been here 7 months, Beckett continued, plowing forward despite the awkward atmosphere. "And while I'm not saying we should rush anything, we also need to acknowledge that he can't live in a kennel forever. It's not fair to him." "What are you suggesting?" Coralie asked carefully. "I think we should start looking for a foster home, somewhere quiet with an experienced cat person who understands his needs. Let him learn what a real home feels like." It was a sensible suggestion, a professional suggestion. Everything Beckett said was absolutely correct. And yet Thora felt like he'd suggested throwing Russet off a cliff. "He's not ready," she said, the words coming out sharper than intended. "How will we know when he's ready?" Beckett challenged gently. "What's the benchmark? Because from where I'm sitting, he's made incredible progress. He's comfortable with staff, he's engaging in normal cat behaviors, he's even initiated contact once. Those are all signs that he could handle a home environment." "With the right person," Thora said. "With the right person," Beckett agreed. "So let's find them." Coralie had been quiet through this exchange, but now she spoke up. "I think Beckett's right that we need to start planning for next steps. But I also think Thora's right that we can't rush this. How about a compromise? We put out feelers through our network, experienced foster homes only, people who understand trauma rehabilitation. If someone seems like a good fit, we arrange very slow, careful introductions. If Russet shows signs of significant stress, we pull back immediately." It was reasonable, fair, exactly what a good veterinarian should suggest. Thora knew this, and she hated knowing it, because it meant she couldn't argue. "Fine," she said, standing abruptly. "I need to check on the boarders." She left the meeting room before anyone could see the tears threatening. It was irrational, this attachment. Russet wasn't her cat. He'd never been her cat. She was a professional providing care to an animal in need, and now that animal was ready to move forward with his life. This was a success story. She should be happy. But standing in the boarding area, listening to the dogs barking and cats meowing, all she felt was a creeping sense of loss. Another piece of her life about to be taken away, another connection severed. She was being ridiculous, she knew, but knowing it didn't make it hurt less. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Silas, holding his custodial cart, gave her a long look. "That cat means something to you," he observed. "All the animals mean something to me," Thora said, not quite meeting his eyes. "True enough, but this one's different." Silas parked his cart and leaned against it, settling in for one of his rare, longer conversations. "Reminds you of yourself, doesn't he? Both building walls, both scared to let anyone in, both trying to survive in a world that hurt you." Thora's breath caught. "I'm not saying you are," Silas interrupted gently. "Just saying I understand why this one got under your skin, and I understand why letting him go feels like losing something important." "So, what do I do?" Thora asked, and wasn't sure if she was asking about Russet or herself or both. "You let him choose," Silas said simply, "same as you've been doing all along. You give him options, you respect his decisions, and you trust that if you're meant to be in his life long term, he'll find a way to tell you." The words settled over Thora like a blanket, comforting and heavy at once. Let him choose. It was the only approach that had ever worked with Russet. Maybe it was the only approach that worked with anyone. The search for potential foster homes began quietly. Coralie reached out to her network of experienced cat fosterers, explaining Russet's situation and needs in detail. The responses ranged from interested to enthusiastic, and within 2 weeks, they had 3 potential candidates. The first was a retired couple in their 70s who had spent decades fostering special needs cats. They came to meet Russet on a Thursday afternoon, bringing with them a wealth of patience and experience. Russet watched them from his kennel, ears forward with curiosity, and showed no signs of distress at their presence. It seemed promising until the husband, moving too quickly while reaching for a dropped pen, triggered an immediate panic response. Russet plastered himself to the back wall, growling, all their careful progress undone in a second. "It's okay," the wife said kindly, backing away. "He's just not ready for someone like us. He needs someone calmer, slower." The second candidate was a younger woman who worked from home and had successfully rehabilitated a feral cat colony. She came on a Tuesday, moving with careful deliberation, speaking in a low, soothing voice. Russet tolerated her presence, but showed zero interest in engaging. No curiosity, no relaxation, just flat neutrality. "I think he needs someone he's already bonded with," she said perceptively. "Starting over with a stranger might be too much regression." The third candidate never made it past the phone screening. When Coralie described Russet's need for very gradual socialization and complete respect for boundaries, the woman said, "Oh, but they all come around once they realize you love them. You just have to be persistent." Coralie politely ended the call. Persistence was the opposite of what Russet needed. After 3 failed matches, the staff meeting reconvened. "We might need to expand our search," Beckett suggested. "Look at sanctuaries, maybe. Places that can give him a permanent home without the pressure of being a normal pet." "A sanctuary would mean he lives in a cage forever," Thora said flatly. "Safer cages, maybe bigger ones, but still cages. That's not a life. What's the alternative?" Beckett spread his hands. "We keep him here indefinitely? Use kennel space we need for actual clinic patients?" "The alternative," Thora said slowly, the words forming even as she spoke them, "is that I adopt him." The silence was absolute. Coralie and Beckett stared at her, processing this sudden declaration. "Thora," Coralie said carefully, "are you sure? This isn't like fostering. This would be a permanent commitment to a cat with significant ongoing needs." "I know." And she did know. She knew it would mean restructuring her home, her routine, her carefully controlled life. She knew it would mean opening herself to attachment, and therefore to potential loss. She knew it was the opposite of the safe, empty existence she'd been living. But she also knew that somewhere in the last 7 months, Russet had stopped being just a patient and had become something more. Not a replacement for Michael, nothing could be that, but a reason to engage with life again. A reason to hope that maybe healing was possible for both of them. "He trusts me," Thora said, "or he's starting to, and I think asking him to build that trust all over again with someone new is cruel. If I'm offering, and I am, then shouldn't we at least try?" Coralie studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "Then let's try. But we do it right. Slow transition, multiple visits to your home before any final move, regular check-ins to make sure everyone's adjusting. Agreed?" "Agreed." They started the transition in late August, with Thora bringing items from her home for Russet to investigate. T-shirts she'd worn so he could learn her scent outside the clinic context. A small blanket from her couch. Pictures of her house, though those were more for the humans' planning than for Russet's benefit. The next step was having Russet spend short periods in a larger space. They set up one of the exam rooms as a temporary expansion area, litter box, food, water, toys, and a cat tree near the window. Thora would bring Russet there in his carrier, then open the door and let him emerge at his own pace. The first time he stayed in the carrier for 2 hours, just watching. The second time, he ventured out to use the litter box. By the 5th visit, he was exploring the room, rubbing his face against furniture corners, and even attempting to climb the cat tree, though his still healing body made him awkward. "He's staking claim," Coralie observed, watching through the door's window. "Marking territory. That's a very good sign." Throughout September, Russet's world gradually expanded. More time in the exam room, supervised introductions to non-threatening areas of the clinic, even brief visits to Thora's car so he could learn that carriers didn't always mean scary vet procedures. Each step was measured, calculated, designed to build confidence rather than overwhelm. And then came the Harvest Moon Festival in early September, and Coralie made a decision that both Thora and Beckett thought was completely insane. "You want to take him where?" Thora asked, certain she'd misheard. "To the festival. In his carrier, obviously. Just for an hour or so, let him observe from safety." Coralie held up a hand before Thora could protest. "Hear me out. He needs to learn that the world outside these walls isn't inherently dangerous, and he needs to practice being in new environments while knowing his safe people are there. controlled exposure. The festival will be loud, crowded, full of strangers, and we'll keep him in the carrier the entire time, surrounded by all three of us. If he shows significant distress, we leave immediately. But Thora, at some point, he needs to learn to handle normal life. Your house will have neighbors, lawn mowers, delivery trucks. If he can't handle a crowded festival with us protecting him, how will he handle any of that alone? The logic was sound, even if the execution terrified Thora. But she trusted Coralie, and more importantly, she trusted that they would abort immediately if Russet couldn't handle it. The Harvest Moon Festival was everything autumn in rural Oregon should be. Crisp air carrying the scent of apples and cinnamon, local artisans displaying handmade quilts and pottery, children running between booths with sticky fingers from too much caramel corn. The clinic's booth was positioned near the edge of the festivities, giving them easy exit access if needed. Russet's carrier was positioned on their table, draped with a light cloth so he could see out, but felt protected. Thora, Coralie, and Beckett positioned themselves around him like a guard, monitoring his every breath and ear twitch. For the first hour, Russet was tense, but not panicking. His ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds. His eyes were wide, taking in the chaos of humanity at play. But he didn't yowl, didn't try to hide completely, didn't show signs of the extreme distress they'd feared. Then a child appeared, maybe 4 years old, with sticky hands and zero impulse control. She spotted the carrier and shrieked with delight. "Kitty!" Everything happened in slow motion. The child lunged toward the carrier, hands outstretched, her parents yards behind and unable to intercept in time. Thora moved to block her, but wasn't fast enough. The little girl's hands slapped against the carrier door, her face pressed to the mesh. This was it. This was the moment where all their progress would shatter. Where Russet would panic, would lash out, would prove that he couldn't handle the normal world after all. But it didn't happen. Russet jerked backward, yes. His ears flattened and his pupils dilated. But he didn't hiss. He didn't strike at the mesh. He simply retreated to the back of the carrier and crouched, breathing hard but not vocalizing. The child's mother arrived, pulling her daughter back with profuse apologies. "I'm so sorry, she just loves animals. I should have been watching." "It's okay," Thora heard herself saying, though her heart was hammering. No harm done. She looked at Russet, really looked at him, and saw something remarkable. He was scared, yes, but he wasn't destroyed by it. His response had been proportional. Fear, retreat, but not the catastrophic panic she'd expected. He'd assessed the threat, determined it wasn't going to actually hurt him, and reacted accordingly. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the ability to feel fear without being consumed by it. "You're doing so good," she told Russet softly, her voice for him alone. So good. I'm so proud of you." His ears twitched forward at her voice, and slowly his breathing settled. He didn't come back to the front of the carrier, but he didn't need to. Just managing his fear was enough. They left the festival 20 minutes later, deeming the experience a success. In the car on the way back to the clinic, Beckett said what they were all thinking. He's ready. Maybe not for everything, but ready to start living outside a kennel. Thora nodded, emotions swirling in her chest. Fear, hope, excitement, terror, all tangled together. I'll start preparing the house this weekend. Preparing her house meant more than just cat-proofing. It meant preparing herself. Creating space not just physically, but emotionally for another living being to share her carefully controlled environment. She spent a Saturday afternoon rearranging her living room. The furniture Michael had chosen, that she'd kept in exactly the same configuration for 2 years like a shrine, needed to shift. She created vertical spaces, cat trees, shelves, places where Russet could observe from safety. She set up multiple hiding spots because he'd need escape routes until he felt secure. And she talked to Michael's picture, which probably meant she was losing it slightly, but it felt important. "I'm not replacing you," she told the photo on the mantel, his familiar smile frozen in time. "But I can't keep living like this. Like I'm waiting for you to come back. You're not coming back, and staying frozen isn't honoring your memory. It's just existing. And you'd hate that. You'd want me to live." The words hung in the quiet house, and Thora felt something release in her chest. Permission, maybe, or just acknowledgement that moving forward wasn't betrayal. October arrived with its particular magic, leaves turning gold and crimson, the air taking on that crisp quality that made every breath feel intentional. And on the first Saturday of the month, Exactly 1 year after Russet had first appeared in the clinic parking lot, Thora brought him home. The transition was anticlimactic in the best possible way. Russet emerged from his carrier in Thora's living room, looked around with alert curiosity rather than terror, and immediately found the cat tree she'd positioned by the window. He climbed to the highest perch, moving carefully, his body still remembering the pain that used to accompany movement, and settled in to watch birds at the feeder she'd installed just for him. "Welcome home," Thora said softly, and the words felt like a promise. The first few days were an adjustment for both of them. Russet explored the house incrementally, mapping out safe routes and hiding spots. Thora learned his rhythms, that he liked breakfast at 6 but dinner at 7, that he preferred being near her but not crowded, that the sound of the washing machine sent him skittering to the bedroom for an hour. But they figured it out, slowly, patiently, with setbacks and small victories all tangled together. The real breakthrough came in November, during the first major snowstorm of the season. Thora was in her kitchen, snow falling heavily outside the window, and found herself crying. Anniversary grief, she supposed. Michael had died in winter, and her body remembered even when her mind tried to forget. She was standing at the counter, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, when she felt something brush against her legs. Russet, who had been sleeping in the living room, had come to investigate. He sat by her feet, looking up with those unreadable amber eyes. And then, with what seemed like deliberate intent, he jumped onto the counter, something he'd never done before. He positioned himself in front of her, between her body and the window, and pressed his head against her hand, not demanding to be petted, not asking for anything, just offering his presence, his warmth, his acknowledgement that he saw her pain and was choosing to stay near it rather than flee from it. Thora's breath caught. Slowly giving him every opportunity to move away, she placed her hand on his head. Russet didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into the touch and began to purr. The sound was rusty, unpracticed, like he'd forgotten how to do it and was relearning, but it filled the kitchen with vibration and warmth, and Thora felt something inside her crack open further. "You understand, don't you?" she whispered, "about losing things and being scared and choosing to try anyway." Russet's purr intensified, his head pressing more firmly against her palm, and in that moment, Thora realized he'd positioned himself right where he could feel her pulse in her wrist, the same rhythmic pattern Michael used to tap when he was thinking, the same rhythm that always meant comfort and home and love. He couldn't have known. It was impossible that he'd know, but animals understood things humans couldn't articulate. They read emotion in body language, in breath patterns, in the chemicals of grief and fear that scented the air. Russet had spent months watching her, learning her, and now he was offering back the exact comfort she needed most. "Thank you," Thora said, and meant it for everything, for surviving, for choosing to trust her, for reminding her that healing was possible, for being brave enough to hope when hope was terrifying. They stood there together, woman and cat, two traumatized creatures learning to live again, while snow fell softly outside and the world held its breath in winter stillness. After that night, Russet's integration into Thora's life accelerated. He began sleeping on her bed, at first by her feet, then gradually moving closer until he was curled against her side. He learned to play with toys, batting at feathers, with the enthusiasm of a kitten despite his 6 or 7 years. He established routines and rituals, waiting by the door when Thora came home from work, supervising her morning coffee preparation from the counter, demanding dinner with increasingly confident meows. He was becoming himself, not the traumatized cat in the kennel, not the terrified creature who'd lived in constant pain, but Russet, a cat with preferences and personality and the confidence to express both. The holidays came and went. Thora decorated modestly, not wanting to overwhelm Russet with too many changes, but she put up a small tree with soft lights, and Russet spent hours sitting beneath it, watching the lights shimmer and the world outside grow dark early. Maris visited on Christmas Eve, her community service hours long since completed, but her connection to Russet still strong. She brought him a present, a soft blanket that smelled like lavender, and something Thora couldn't quite identify. "It's got chamomile in it," Maris explained, seeing Thora's confusion. "My therapist said it can help with anxiety. I thought maybe—" She trailed off, suddenly looking young and uncertain. "I think he'll love it," Thora said warmly, and was rewarded with one of Maris's rare full smiles. They settled in the living room, Maris and Thora drinking hot chocolate while Russet investigated his new blanket. He sniffed it thoroughly, kneaded it with his front paws, and then, to everyone's delight, circled 3 times and settled on it with a satisfied sigh. "He looks happy," Maris observed. "He is happy, and that's largely thanks to you." Thora met the girl's eyes. "Your patience with him, your understanding, it helped him remember that humans could be safe, that trust was possible." "I think he helped me too," Maris admitted quietly. "Watching him get better made me think maybe I could get better. Like if a cat could learn to trust again after everything he'd been through, maybe I could too." "Are you getting better?" "Yeah, I mean, it's not linear or whatever. I still have bad days, but I'm back in school, and I'm actually talking to people sometimes, and my therapist says I'm making real progress." She paused, then added with a shy smile, "I even made a friend. A real one, not just someone who tolerates me." Thora felt her eyes sting with tears. Again, she'd cried more in the last year than in the previous 2 combined, but these were different tears. Not grief and loss, but connection and hope, and the messy beauty of healing. "I'm so proud of you," she told Maris. "Both of you. You're both incredibly brave." They sat together in the warm glow of the Christmas lights, 3 individuals who'd found each other through trauma and were learning slowly to build something better from the pieces. Winter deepened, and with it came a different kind of peace. Russet's scars, both physical and emotional, would always be part of him. Some sounds would always startle him more than a cat who'd never been hurt. Some movements would always make him flinch before his brain caught up and remembered he was safe. But more and more often, his first response was curiosity rather than fear. When the mail carrier came to the door, Russet would watch from his safe perch rather than hiding. When Thora's neighbor visited with her friendly golden retriever, Russet observed from the windowsill with interest rather than terror. He was learning day by day that the world held more kindness than cruelty, that pain wasn't permanent, that trust, while risky, opened doors to experiences worth having. And Thora was learning the same lessons. She'd started accepting more social invitations, reconnecting with friends she'd pushed away after Michael's death. She'd joined a grief support group, finding unexpected comfort in shared experience. She'd even been on a date, just coffee, nothing serious, but she'd gone. She'd tried. "You're my inspiration," she told Russet one evening in February. He was sprawled across her lap while she read, his body completely relaxed, his purr a constant rumble. "If you can be this brave, so can I." Russet opened one amber eye, regarded her with what might have been affection or might have been annoyance at being disturbed, then closed it again and went back to sleep. March brought the anniversary of Russet's surgery, and Thora marked it quietly with a special dinner, fresh salmon, which Russet demolished with enthusiasm, and a long evening of just being together. No special activities, no big gestures, just the comfortable presence of 2 beings who'd learned to coexist peacefully. As she watched him groom himself with meticulous attention, Thora thought about how far they'd both come. From the terrified cat in the parking lot and the grieving woman moving through life like a ghost, to this: warmth, contentment, connection. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and difficult days and moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing to try, but they'd both kept choosing life, kept choosing to hope, even when hope felt dangerous, kept opening themselves to the possibility of hurt, because the alternative, safe isolation, was a living death. The story of Russet wasn't a fairy tale. He didn't magically transform into a different cat. He would always carry the marks of his trauma, always have triggers and boundaries that needed respecting, but he'd learned to live with his history rather than being trapped by it. He'd found a way to integrate his past into his present without letting it dictate his future. And wasn't that the essence of healing? Not forgetting what hurt you, but refusing to let it be the only story you told about yourself. Thora understood this now in a way she hadn't before. Michael's death would always be part of her story. The love they'd shared, the loss she'd endured, those experiences had shaped her, but they didn't have to be the end of her story. They could be a chapter, painful, but not final, leading to something new. "We're going to be okay," she told Russet. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it completely. Outside, spring was beginning to show itself in tentative green shoots and longer daylight. Inside Thora's small house on the outskirts of Millbrook, an orange tabby slept peacefully in a patch of afternoon sun. His body relaxed, his dreams, whatever cats dream, no longer haunted by barbed wire and pain. His name was Russet, and he had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let yourself be loved. That trust, while terrifying, could lead to belonging. That endings could become beginnings if you were willing to take the risk. It was a lesson worth learning, worth living, worth sharing with anyone who'd ever been hurt and wondered if healing was possible. The answer, Russet would tell you if he could speak, is always yes. Healing is always possible. It just takes time, patience, and someone willing to sit with your fear until you're ready to let it go. And sometimes that someone is waiting for you in a veterinary clinic parking lot, or in a living room warmed by winter sun, or in the quiet spaces between heartbeats where hope lives, despite all evidence that it shouldn't. Sometimes that someone is waiting for you to be ready, and when you are, they'll be there, patient and steady, offering you the gift of second chances. 18 months after Russet came home to stay, Thora stood in the clinic's parking lot on a crisp October morning, watching the leaves spiral down from the maple trees in shades of amber and gold. The air carried that particular autumn scent, wood smoke and dying leaves and the promise of winter to come. It was the same time of year when a frightened orange tabby had first appeared in this exact spot, changing everything. She'd come early before her shift started, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. Memory, maybe, or gratitude. The parking lot looked the same as it always had. Worn asphalt, the dumpster in the corner, the storage shed where Russet had nearly frozen to death. But it felt different now, saturated with meaning it hadn't held before. "Thought I might find you here," a voice said behind her. Thora turned to find Coralie approaching, 2 coffee cups in hand. She offered one to Thora, who accepted it gratefully. 2 years, Thora said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Has it really been 2 years since he showed up? 2 years next week, actually. November 3rd. Coralie stood beside her, both of them looking at the empty parking lot as if they could see the ghost of that terrified cat. Hard to believe, isn't it? How much can change in such a short time? Thora nodded, thinking about everything that had shifted in her life since Russet entered it. The grief over Michael hadn't disappeared. She'd learned it never would, but it had transformed into something she could carry without being crushed by it. She'd rejoined the world slowly, tentatively, learning to engage with life again. She'd even started dating someone seriously, a librarian named Daniel who loved mystery novels and terrible puns, and understood that some evenings she needed to be quiet with her memories. "How is the famous Mr. Russet these days?" Coralie asked with a smile. "Spoiled rotten," Thora admitted, unable to keep the fondness from her voice. "He's claimed the entire house as his kingdom. Daniel says he's never met a cat with such strong opinions about furniture placement." "And how does Russet feel about Daniel?" Thora laughed. "He approves, though he made Daniel work for it. Wouldn't let him pet him for the first 3 months, just watched him like he was conducting some kind of extended character assessment." "That sounds exactly right," Coralie said. "Once traumatized, always cautious, but not always afraid," Thora countered. "That's the difference. Russet's cautious, but he's not controlled by his fear anymore. He investigates new things now. He plays. He gets excited when I come home. He's living, not just surviving." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee and watching the morning light strengthen. The clinic would open soon, and the day would fill with appointments and emergencies and the constant motion of caring for animals. But for now there was just this, a pocket of peace in a place where a miracle had slowly, patiently unfolded. "Maris is doing well too," Coralie said. "Her mother emailed me last week. Apparently she's thriving in her senior year. Got early admission to the State University for Veterinary Sciences. Says working here changed her life." "Working with Russet changed her life," Thora corrected gently. "He taught her, taught both of us really, that trauma doesn't have to be the end of your story, that you can be broken and still become whole again, just in a different shape than before." "Speaking of which," Coralie said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through something. "I got an email yesterday from a woman about 3 hours north of here. She's got a cat, a calico who was found abandoned in a foreclosed property. Severely matted, possible embedded foreign objects based on initial examination. Won't let anyone touch her. The local vet is talking about euthanasia because she's unadoptable." Thora's chest tightened. "And you're telling me this because I thought maybe you'd want to consult." Share Russet's story. Let them know that unadoptable doesn't mean unlovable, that with time and patience and the right approach, these animals can heal. Coralie met her eyes. You've become something of an expert in trauma rehabilitation, whether you realize it or not. The idea settled over Thora like a calling. She thought about Russet, about the months of careful work that had transformed him from a pain-ridden, terrified creature into a confident, affectionate companion. She thought about all the other animals out there, written off as lost causes, who just needed someone willing to invest the time. I'll reach out to her today, Thora said. See if I can help. Coralie smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. Inside the clinic, the day unfolded with its usual rhythm. Thora moved through examinations and procedures with practiced competence, but part of her mind was already drafting the email to the woman with the calico. She'd include photos of Russet, documentation of his recovery, detailed notes on their approach. She'd offer hope grounded in real experience. During her lunch break, she called home to check her messages and heard Daniel's voice on the answering machine. Hey, just calling to say Russet knocked over that plant you love. Again, he's completely unrepentant. Also, I'm making dinner tonight. That pasta thing you like. See you around 6? Thora smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. This was her life now. Messy and full and sometimes chaotic, but undeniably vibrantly alive. So different from the hollow existence she'd been living 2 years ago. That evening she came home to find Daniel in her kitchen. Their kitchen now, really, since he'd essentially moved in 3 months ago, with sauce simmering and bread warming in the oven. Russet was perched on the counter, supervising the cooking process with the entitled air of a cat who knew he was central to the household. Down, Thora said automatically, though without much force. Russet gave her a slow blink and stayed exactly where he was. Daniel laughed. I already tried. He informed me that this is his kitchen and he'll sit where he likes. Informed you, did he? Very clearly in cat. Daniel stirred the sauce, then turned to kiss her hello. Russet watched this interaction with apparent approval, his tail swishing once in what might have been satisfaction. Over dinner, Thora told Daniel about the calico up north, about Coralie's suggestion that she consult on the case. She expected him to be supportive, but perhaps a little concerned about the time commitment. Instead, his face lit up. That's perfect, he said enthusiastically. You've been looking for a way to do something more, to share what you learned with Russet. This could be the start of something bigger. Consulting, maybe even starting a program specifically for traumatized animals. I don't know if I'm qualified. You're the most qualified person I can think of, Daniel interrupted. You've lived it. You've done the work. And most importantly, you understand that healing isn't linear. That setbacks don't mean failure. That patience and respect and time can accomplish what force never could. Thora felt tears prick her eyes. When did you get so wise? I read a lot of books, Daniel said with a grin. Also, I've been watching you with Russet for almost a year now. I've learned from both of you. After dinner, they settled on the couch with Russet between them. He'd claimed this spot months ago, positioning himself precisely where he could touch both of them simultaneously. Now he stretched out, with his head on Thora's leg and his back paws on Daniel's thigh, purring like a small engine. Do you ever think about what his life was like before? Daniel asked quietly, stroking Russet's flank. Before the traps, before the pain, when he was maybe someone's loved pet. Sometimes, Thora admitted. I wonder if he remembers being held without hurting. If somewhere deep in his memory, there's knowledge of what it felt like to be safe. And now he knows it again, Daniel said. That's the important part. Whatever he lost, whatever was taken from him, he got it back. Not the same way, maybe, but he found his way to safety and love again. Russet's purr intensified, as if he agreed with this assessment of his journey. Thora let her hand rest on his warm body, feeling the vibration of contentment, and thought about second chances, about the mysterious alchemy that transforms pain into wisdom, trauma into resilience, fear into the courage to try again. I'm going to help that calico, she said, and any other animal I can. Russet taught me something invaluable, that no one is ever too broken to heal. They just need the right conditions, the right patience, the right person willing to wait as long as it takes. Daniel squeezed her hand. That's what you gave him, what you gave yourself too. Later that night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Thora lay awake listening to Russet's steady breathing from his spot at the foot of the bed. She thought about the journey they'd taken together, From that snowy November night when she'd found him trembling in the shed, through the months of careful rehabilitation, to this moment of peaceful domesticity. The road hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and frustrations and moments when she doubted whether either of them would ever truly heal. But they'd kept showing up for each other day after day, choosing hope even when hope felt like the hardest choice. And now look at them. A cat who'd been written off as feral and unadoptable was sleeping peacefully in a warm bed, confident in his safety. A woman who'd been frozen in grief was building a new life, opening her heart to connection despite the risk. Both of them scarred but whole, broken but mended, forever changed but not destroyed by what they'd endured. Thora reached down and gently touched Russet's back. He stirred slightly, made a small chirping sound, then settled back into sleep. The simple acceptance of her touch, so hard-won, never failed to move her. "Thank you," she whispered to him, "for teaching me how to live again, for being brave enough to trust me, for reminding me that endings can become beginnings." Outside, the October wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last of summer and ushering in the season of change. In the warm darkness of Thora's bedroom, two survivors slept peacefully, their healing intertwined, their futures open to possibilities that had once seemed impossible. The story of an orange tabby named Russet wasn't about a miraculous transformation or a fairy tale ending. It was about the unglamorous, difficult, beautiful work of healing, about the courage required to trust again after betrayal, about the patience needed to let growth happen at its own pace, about the revolutionary act of believing that those who've been hurt deserve kindness rather than punishment. It was a story that would continue unfolding for the rest of their lives, with new chapters and unexpected developments, and the ongoing process of learning to live fully rather than just survive. But the foundation was solid now, built on patience, respect, and the hard-won knowledge that love, when offered without demands or conditions, has the power to heal wounds that seemed permanent. And in the morning, when Thora woke to find Russet sitting on her chest, staring at her with patient expectation until she got up to feed him breakfast, she'd laugh at his presumption and his confidence and his complete certainty that he deserved good things, because he did deserve good things. They both did, and for the first time in a long time, Thora believed it.